بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. Following the lectures of literary criticism, today's lecture for configurative reading. I've already sent you the documents to read: the reading process, phenomenological approach, J. Hillis Miller, the critic as host, Hans Robert Strauss, the three horizons of reading from towards an aesthetics of reception, Peter Rabinovitz from Before Reading, Judith Fetterly, Introduction to the Resistant Reader, and Norman H. Holland, The Question, Who Reads What, How? All right, I thought I'd begin with sort of revision around what Gadamer's and Heidegger did with the reading, the phenomenon of reading. I think the phenomenology has been raised by Husserl first. In this lecture, we will talk about or see the approaches to different approaches to interpretation. But before we talk about Isa Wolfgang, who is, of course, the outstanding figures in terms of the reading process and the phenomenology of reading, E.D. Hirsch is certainly, or has certainly taken part into that part of criticism. If you remember, now Gadamer is concerned now with the norm of classicism, which is later in your excerpt, he begins to call tradition. The reason tradition is so important for him is that the political and cultural conservative matter should be taken into account. Now, I quote Gadamer: "The reader has a limited capacity to understand a remote horizon. He doesn't think the reader can perform miracles in intuitively feeling his or her way into the outlook of another time and place. Hence, the value of classicism or tradition is that there is evident common ground in the text we call classical." Now here, if we talk about tradition, as far as we have dealt with the tradition and the individual talent, you will certainly talk about or think about having a historical sense to understand a literary text or poem in particular. But here, the sorts of texts that speak, or we feel as though we are speaking to all places and times. It is widely contested whether there is really any merit in talking about texts that way when their historical differences remain so profound and sometimes inassimilable. But for a moment, I repeat only that Gadamer's conservatism about the canon is related to his doubts about the ability of readers to span enormous gaps. Here I'm quoting Fry, 2012. He adds, "I use that word, gaps, advisedly here because it is the word to which Wolfgang attaches a wholly positive value in talking about the advantage of distance between reader and text, and also about the semantic distance between successive moments of a text." So here the distance is, I think that you recall the notion of distance previously pinpointed at the beginning of the semester course. We started talking about this distance that should be observed between the beholder or the reader and the piece of art, and we have given this example of the picture or an artistic creation of a painter, for example, Michelangelo or another one. So there should be a distance that should be observed in order to issue or adjust the angle or that approach that through which we are going to deal with the text or with that piece of art. He used that word gaps in order to attach a wholly positive value in talking about the advantage of distance between the reader and the text. Also, the semantic distance between or successive moments of the text. Now, does Gadamer underestimate the mental leaps of which readers are capable? Perhaps so. He adds, just as in conversation, we understand irony to the extent to which we are in agreement on the subject with other person or with the other person. So here, irony, we understand, interlocutors are capable of understanding the ironies, whether there is an outcome of agreement or disagreement, but we at the end we understand each other through ironies. All right. Now, so far, Gadamer's yes, Gadamer would think that the reader will be able to understand whether you are ironic or not. This seems to be like a patently forced. This is about political talk. And there is here a kind of symbiosis, ironically enough, between political opponents, precisely in the measure to which their ironies are mutually intelligible, that is understandable to a certain extent, and surely this applies to conversation in general. Now, if it is right to think this, perhaps we have found a loophole, or what we call an ambiguity or an inadequacy in a law or set of laws in Gadamer's conservatism. His premise is that in order to understand, there has to be a basis of agreement. But what we have just said is true about understanding each other's ironies, even where there is a disagreement. Here, there should be something like called the opening up, the canon, opening up of the canon, conceding that it does not have to be continuous traditional canon, is available to us once again, and Gadamer's conservatism on this issue can get be aside. All right, so as far as the Gadamer conservatism here, I'd like to get back to the word plastic in the poetry of Akenside, when we have given this discrepancy in terms of translation, not translation from language to language, from one language that is alien, that is structured in a form that is artistic and remote in time and should be called translation. And sometimes we translate poetry within the same language. As far as I recall the saying of or the Wimsat, the explanation poetry, the interpretation of poetry is the explanation of the explicit. Some words that might seem explicit, but they are not. In fact, they should be explained, explanated in terms of their historical sense. One should be endowed, of course, with this bulk of European poetry and text. All right. Yes, plastic, and here and is being pulled up short. Recognize the need also for the fundamental act of freedom that Gadamer calls a merger of horizons. In such moment, we knowingly confront an horizon not our own that has to be negotiated if understanding is to take place. Our reading is imprisoned if there is a being of pulled up short. We just take for granted that we are reading what we are reading belongs exclusively to our horizon. Quite ambiguous, the phenomenon of reading, of course. It's gonna be clear in the depth of the lecture. All right, now Gordon acknowledged this. He will insist on it has I say, but he doesn't lay stress on it because the gap that is implied in the need to be pulled short is not a big one. We can easily traverse it. Just to belabor the example of plastic. If we don't understand the 18th century meaning of the word, we still notice that the modern meaning is implausible. So we go to the Oxford English Dictionary, we see it meant something different than our problem is solved, and we continue to read. No, that is not the required labor, if so to speak. When we read, there should be a continuity. Now, regardless to the words that we do not understand, they belong to another century in terms of meaning, in terms of historicity. Yes. So the act of reading here really is to swing into high gear, and we'll see that these accounts and for the obvious difference between the two implied canons here, the canon of Gadamer's and the canon of the beholders of the phenomenon of freedom as a phenomenon. Now Hirsch argues, on the other hand, borrowing from Kant, that past and culturally disparate authors should be an end and not a means for us, so we ought to understand them strictly on their terms. Hirsch is introduced in that particular context, and then and now we go back to briefly from there is Hirsch argument also mentioned in the last statement or last lectures, that meaning is an affair of consciousness and not of words. In other words, here the text is what makes the ascertainment of meaning available to us, but meaning is not in the text. Meaning belongs to the intention of the author, and that is what we need to arrive at. Now here we are talking about this point, that is the intention of the author. As you know, we have argued around the intention of the author while reading the death of the author, the intentional policy, and what is an author. That an author is a function among other functions, and it belongs to the hermeneutic circle. And here, the fact of cutting the umbilical cord